Story number 1. Whispers of the Wind. I never thought I'd find myself recounting a tale so chilling, yet here I am, compelled by memories that refuse to fade. It was Christmas Eve of 1985, a night that was supposed to be filled with joy and warmth, but instead, it became a haunting chapter in my life that still lingers in the shadows of my mind. My wife, Laura, and I had always cherished our annual tradition of hiking through Yellowstone National Park during the holiday season. The park's serene beauty, blanketed in snow, offered a perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of our everyday lives. That year, we decided to explore a lesser-known trail that promised breathtaking views and a sense of solitude. Little did we know, the forest held secrets that would forever alter our perception of the natural world. We set out early in the afternoon, the sky a clear blue, the sun casting a golden hue over the snow-covered landscape. Bundled in warm layers, we carried our backpacks with essentials, tents, food, and warm beverages. The trail was peaceful, the only sounds being the crunch of our boots on the snow and the distant calls of wildlife. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. By late afternoon, we reached a clearing near a frozen lake, the perfect spot to set up camp. The beauty of the scene was mesmerizing. Ice glistening under the fading sunlight, reflections dancing on the surface of the water. We pitched our tents, built a small fire, and settled in for the night, enjoying the warmth and the quiet companionship that made our hike so special. As dusk turned to night, the temperature dropped sharply, the air growing crisp and biting. We sat by the fire, sipping hot cocoa and sharing stories, the flames casting flickering shadows on our faces. The tranquility was comforting, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of the city we had left behind. But as midnight approached, an unsettling stillness settled over the forest, an eerie calm that seemed to hold its breath. "Do you feel that?" Laura asked, her eyes scanning the darkened woods beyond our campsite. I nodded, a shiver running down my spine. "Yeah, it's colder than usual. Maybe a weather front moving in." Before she could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing our fire in an instant. The temperature plummeted, and we were plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the inky blackness, revealing our immediate surroundings. "Probably just a strong wind," I reassured her, though my voice betrayed my unease. "Let's get back inside the tents." But as we made our way back, the wind picked up, swirling around us with a ferocity that seemed almost supernatural. The snow whipped against our faces, the cold seeping into our bones, making every step a struggle. Laura's hand tightened around mine, her grip conveying a silent fear that mirrored my own. Suddenly, a series of strange sounds echoed through the forest, whispers carried by the wind. Indistinct and haunting, it was as if the trees themselves were speaking, their voices merging into a chorus of sorrow and despair. We stopped, listening intently, trying to discern any meaning from the eerie symphony. "Did you hear that?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, it's like voices, maybe some animals, or people out there." But there was something undeniably different about the sounds, a mournful quality that sent chills down my spine. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, until it felt like they were right beside us, encircling us in a web of invisible threads. Without warning, a powerful force slammed into us, knocking us off our feet and sending us sprawling into the snow. The impact was so intense that it felt like being hit by an invisible wall, leaving us disoriented and breathless. We struggled to rise, our bodies aching from the sudden attack. But there were no visible signs of damage, no bruises, no cuts, just a lingering sense of weakness and dread. "Tom, Laura, are you okay?" Jenna, one of our fellow hikers who had joined us earlier in the day, rushed to our side, concern etched on her face. We nodded weakly, too shaken to respond. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on us like a physical weight. We tried to move, to stand, but our limbs felt heavy, our movements sluggish as if ensnared by an unseen force. "We need to leave," I managed to say, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Let's get out of here." With Jenna's help, we stumbled back to our tents, our minds racing to comprehend what had just happened. The forest around us seemed unchanged, the path we had taken leading back to familiar landmarks. But the sense of being hunted lingered, an invisible predator lurking just beyond our sight. We gathered our belongings as quickly as possible, the cold now biting at our skin despite our layers. As we made our way through the forest, the whispers returned, softer this time, like distant echoes of pain. Every step felt like a battle against an invisible force, the snow crunching underfoot a stark reminder of our isolation. Finally, we reached our vehicle, shivering from the cold and the lingering fear. I fumbled with the keys, hands numb from the chill, and managed to unlock the door. We piled into the car, the engine roaring to life as we sped away from the campsite, the forest receding into the distance. But the feeling of being watched persisted, a silent presence that followed us through the winding roads. Jenna kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her eyes wide with fear. "I swear, something was there. We need to report this." But as the hours passed and we reached the safety of civilization, our story was met with skepticism. Authorities dismissed it as a freak weather event, a rare gust of wind, or perhaps a group of intoxicated campers playing tricks on each other. But we knew the truth: something had attacked us, something beyond our understanding. In the weeks that followed, we tried to move on, but the memory of that night haunted us. Laura struggled with nightmares, her once joyful spirit now marred by the fear of the unknown. Jenna became more withdrawn, her vibrant energy dimmed by the experience. As for me, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, the whispers lingering in the back of my mind like a ghostly reminder of our brush with the supernatural. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of Yellowstone, seeking any accounts of similar incidents. What I found was a tapestry of unexplained phenomena, stories of lost hikers, eerie sounds in the night, and mysterious entities said to guard the wilderness. One legend, in particular, stood out: the tale of the whispering wind, a spirit bound to the forest, seeking revenge on those who trespassed or disrespected the natural order. The more I learned, the more I realized that our encounter was part of something much larger, a manifestation of the park's deep-rooted mysteries and the restless spirits that roamed its vast expanse. The whispering wind was said to be a guardian, protecting the sacred land from those who failed to honor its beauty and tranquility. Armed with this knowledge, I sought out experts in folklore and the paranormal, hoping to find answers and perhaps a way to lay the spirits to rest. I connected with a local historian, Dr. Emily Hartman, who had spent years researching Yellowstone's legends and supernatural occurrences. "Tom, your experience aligns with many reports we've had over the years," Dr. Hartman explained during our meeting. "The whispering wind is often described as an invisible force that instills fear and weakness in those who disrespect the land. It's a protective spirit, but one that can be vengeful if provoked." She suggested a ritual to honor the spirit and seek its forgiveness, a way to show respect and mend the broken connection. Determined to help Laura, Jenna, and myself find peace, we followed her guidance, performing the ritual at our campsite the following Christmas Eve. We returned to Yellowstone, the park now even more enchanting under the blanket of snow. With Dr. Hartman's instructions, we built a small shrine near the lake, a gesture of gratitude and respect. We lit candles, offered prayers, and spoke words of apology for any unintentional disrespect we may have shown the land. As midnight approached, the atmosphere felt different, calmer, more serene. We sat by the fire, watching as the flames flickered and cast a warm glow over the snow-covered ground. The night was quiet, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the gentle rustling of the trees. Just as we began to feel hopeful, the whispers returned, but this time, they were softer, less menacing. The air still held a chill, but it was no longer oppressive. We watched as the snowflakes danced in the light of the fire, the night sky clear and star-studded. Suddenly, a gentle breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it a sense of peace and closure. The whispers faded, replaced by the distant sounds of wildlife settling for the night. We felt a presence, not one of fear, but of gratitude and relief. A figure appeared before us, a translucent form of a woman dressed in traditional attire, her eyes filled with kindness and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with genuine emotion. "May you always honor and protect this land." With those final words, she dissolved into the night, leaving behind a profound sense of calm. The whispering wind had accepted our gesture of respect, allowing us to find peace and understanding in the heart of Yellowstone. We left the park that night with a newfound appreciation for the mysteries that nature holds and the spirits that guard them. The experience bonded us in ways we couldn't have imagined. A reminder that the wilderness is not just a place of beauty, but also of profound and often inexplicable forces. Years later, Laura and I still share the story with friends and family, our voices tinged with both fear and reverence. Jenna and Mark have moved on, their lives touched by the lingering memories of that Christmas Eve. And I, forever changed by our encounter, continue to seek out the unknown, driven by a desire to understand the delicate balance between humanity and the natural world. Yellowstone remains a place of wonder and mystery, its vast landscapes hiding secrets that transcend time and logic. And every Christmas, as I gaze upon the snow-covered pines and the shimmering ice of the lake, I am reminded of the night we faced the whispering wind and learned the true meaning of respect and harmony with the wild. Story number 2. Echoes of the lost laughter. I never considered myself a believer in the supernatural. Growing up in Denver, surrounded by the sprawling urban landscape, I found comfort in the tangible and the explainable. But that Christmas of 1999 in Yellowstone National Park shattered my skepticism in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was a trip that my friends and I had planned for months, seeking solace from the grind of everyday life and hoping to create memories amidst nature's grandeur. Little did we know, the wilderness held secrets that would haunt us forever. We arrived at Yellowstone in early December, the park already cloaked in a thick blanket of snow. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint hint of smoke from distant geysers. Our campsite was nestled near Yellowstone Lake, a serene spot with stunning views of the surrounding forest and the imposing presence of Old Faithful in the distance. Setting up camp was easier than expected, the snow providing a natural cushion that made pitching tents a straightforward task. That first evening, we gathered around a roaring fire, the flames dancing and casting flickering shadows on our faces. The night sky was clear, the stars twinkling like diamonds against the velvet darkness. We shared stories, laughed, and toasted marshmallows, the warmth of the fire a comforting barrier against the biting cold. It felt perfect until midnight approached. As the clock struck 12, a sudden hush fell over our group. The usual sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, seemed to fade into an eerie silence. We exchanged curious glances, sensing that something was different. It was then that we heard it, a series of soft, high-pitched laughs echoing from deep within the forest. First, the laughter was faint, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. But as the minutes passed, it grew louder, more distinct, filling the night air with a haunting melody. It wasn't the cheerful laughter of children or the hearty chuckles of adults. It was something else entirely, distorted, sorrowful, and laced with an unspoken pain. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa, always the most sensitive of our group, nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Yeah, sounded like laughter, but not real. It's creepy. Mark, the skeptic among us, tried to rationalize it. Probably just some animals. Maybe a family of coyotes or something. They do howl around this time. But Jenna, ever the storyteller, shook her head. No, it's different. It sounds almost human, but twisted, like someone's in pain. We sat in uneasy silence, the laughter weaving through the trees, seemingly circling our campsite. The temperature dropped further, our breaths visible in the cold air as the fire flickered. The laughter continued, now accompanied by faint whispers that floated on the wind, whispers that seemed to call our names, begging us to follow. Maybe we should check it out, Mark suggested, a hint of bravado in his voice. I hesitated, feeling a primal fear clutch at my chest. Are you crazy? We don't know what's out there. Jenna, unable to shake the curiosity that had driven her all summer, stood up. Come on, Tom. Could be something amazing, or at least something interesting. Reluctantly, I joined her, grabbing a flashlight from our gear. Mark and Lisa stayed behind, their faces pale and worried. We ventured into the darkness, the snow crunching beneath our boots as we followed the sound of the laughter deeper into the forest. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow, creating an almost impenetrable barrier around us. As we walked, the laughter seemed to grow closer, intertwining with the whispers that now filled the air. Follow us, follow us. The voices echoed, compelling us forward. The beam of my flashlight danced across the snow-covered ground, revealing strange footprints that looked human but had an odd, almost elongated shape. Look at these, I said, crouching to examine them. They're definitely human, but the size and shape, they don't match any of us. Jenna shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her. We should go back. This feels wrong. But before I could respond, the ground beneath us began to tremble, small vibrations shaking our feet. The laughter turned into cries of anguish, the whispers growing louder, more desperate. Suddenly, a figure materialized in front of us, a ghostly apparition of a young girl, her form translucent and ethereal, dressed in old-fashioned winter attire. Her eyes were hollow, filled with a sorrow that pierced through the darkness. Help us, she moaned, her voice echoing through the trees. I felt a surge of compassion, my fear momentarily forgotten. What do you need? How can we help you? The apparition reached out, her hands trembling. Find our way. Lost in the snow. Help us find peace. Before I could respond, the figure dissolved into a flurry of snowflakes, the laughter and whispers intensifying before abruptly stopping. We stood there, breathless and shaken, the weight of the encounter pressing down on us. We need to get back, I said, my voice barely steady. Now. We hurried through the forest, the oppressive silence now replaced by an overwhelming sense of urgency. The path seemed unfamiliar, the landmarks we had used to navigate obscured by the thick snowfall. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, the forest seemingly closing in around us. Tom, what do we do? Jenna cried, her voice cracking with fear. Follow the footprints, I instructed, remembering the strange tracks we had seen earlier. They might lead us back. We followed the trail, but the footprints kept changing, morphing into different shapes that defied explanation. The forest felt alive, the trees whispering secrets in the wind, the snow swirling around us in a relentless storm. The temperature continued to drop, our breaths visible as we trudged through the deepening snow. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. The structure was dilapidated, its windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. The laughter had returned, now closer and more menacing, echoing through the clearing. We have to go inside, Mark urged, his voice trembling. It's the only shelter we can find. Reluctantly, we entered the cabin, the door creaking shut behind us. The interior was dark, the remnants of furniture covered in thick layers of dust and cobwebs. A single window allowed a faint light to filter through, casting eerie shadows across the room. We huddled together, trying to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, the laughter erupted inside the cabin. A cacophony of voices filled with pain and anger. The temperature plummeted further, our breaths forming icy clouds in the air. Shadows seemed to dance on the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that moved with a life of their own. "We need to leave," Lisa insisted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. But as we turned to exit, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. The apparition of the young girl reappeared, her eyes pleading and sorrowful. "Please, help us find peace." I felt a surge of determination. "What do you need us to do?" Her form flickered, the sorrow in her eyes deepening. "Remember us? Honor our stories? Help us move on." Before I could respond, the room began to shake, the foundation groaning under the weight of unseen forces. The shadows coalesced into figures, ghostly apparitions of men and women, their faces twisted in anguish, their forms ethereal and insubstantial. They surrounded us, their cries echoing through the cabin. "We're trapped. Help us. Set us free." The voices overlapped, a chorus of despair that filled the room. Desperate to find a solution, I remembered the stories we had heard from Tom about honoring the spirits and respecting the land. "We'll help you," I promised, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Tell us what we need to do." The apparitions began to converge, their forms merging into a central figure, a woman with outstretched arms, her face obscured by shadows. "Remember us? Keep our memories alive. Let others know our stories." As she spoke, the shadows began to dissipate, the oppressive energy lifting as if the very air was being cleansed. The cabin steadied, the temperature rising, and the laughter fading into a peaceful silence. The young girl smiled, a serene expression that had been missing from her sorrowful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now filled with peace. "You've given us what we needed." The room brightened, the dark shadows replaced by the soft glow of dawn filtering through the window. The door swung open, allowing us to leave the cabin, the forest outside calm and serene once more. We hurried back to our campsite, the storm having passed and the snow settling into a quiet stillness. The next morning, we packed up our gear and made our way out of Yellowstone, the memory of that night etched into our minds forever. The authorities had no explanation for our disappearance and the strange events we had encountered. But we knew the truth. We had been touched by the restless spirits of Yellowstone, spirits longing for remembrance and peace. Years have passed since that Christmas Eve, but the memory remains vivid, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the supernatural. I often find myself revisiting Yellowstone, drawn by a sense of duty to honor the stories of those who were lost. Each visit is a pilgrimage, a way to pay respects and ensure that their voices are never forgotten. The laughter we heard that night echoes in my mind during the quiet moments, a gentle reminder that some souls linger not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to be remembered and to find peace. Yellowstone remains a place of beauty and mystery, its wilderness holding secrets that transcend time, waiting for those brave enough to listen and honor the echoes of the lost. And every Christmas, as the snow blankets the earth and the nights grow long, I think of that night, the laughter in the forest, the spectral apparitions, and the silent plea for remembrance that forever changed my understanding of the unseen. Story number 3. The dark veil over Yellowstone. I never considered myself a superstitious person. Growing up in Chicago, surrounded by the relentless pace of city life, I found comfort in logic and reason. But that Christmas of 2002 changed everything. My friends Mark, Jenna, and Lisa and I decided to escape the holiday chaos by driving to Yellowstone National Park, seeking solace in its vast, untouched wilderness. We were adventurers at heart, always chasing the next thrill, the next breathtaking view. Little did we know, Yellowstone held secrets far darker than any of us could imagine. The journey began on a crisp December morning, the city skyline gradually giving way to rolling hills blanketed in snow. By midday, we arrived at the park's entrance, greeted by towering pines heavy with frost and the distant roar of geysers. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of pine and the promise of untouched beauty. We checked into a secluded cabin near Yellowstone Lake, our base for the week ahead. That first night, the sky was clear, stars glittering like diamonds against the velvet darkness. We gathered around a roaring fire, sharing stories and planning our hikes for the coming days. The tranquility was comforting, a stark contrast to the bustling city we had left behind. But as midnight approached, an uneasy feeling settled over me, a premonition that something was amiss. We decided to take a drive along the winding roads that skirted the lake, the snow crunching under our tires. The landscape was mesmerizing, each turn revealing a new vista of icy beauty. As we ventured deeper into the park, the weather began to change. Dark clouds rolled in swiftly, swirling ominously above us. The temperature plummeted, the air growing thick with an unnatural chill. "Looks like a storm's brewing," Mark remarked, squinting against the rapidly darkening sky. "Probably just a typical winter storm," Jenna added, though her voice lacked conviction. But this was no ordinary storm. The thick, black cloud descended upon us with terrifying speed, enveloping the area in pitch darkness. The snow intensified, each flake cold and sharp as it pelted our windshield. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, the world outside our windows becoming a blur of swirling darkness. "Turn around," Lisa urged, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "This doesn't look right." Before Mark could respond, the clouds seemed to close in, pressing against the car like a living entity. The wind howled through the trees, a mournful wail that sent shivers down my spine. The temperature inside the car plummeted, our breaths visible in the icy air. We struggled to navigate through the dense fog, the roads disappearing behind us as the cloud advanced. Suddenly, the storm ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Silence enveloped us, the oppressive darkness lifting to reveal a haunting stillness. The world outside was transformed. Everything was covered in a thick layer of snow, untouched and pristine, but the air felt heavy, laden with an inexplicable sense of dread. "We need to find shelter," Mark said, breaking the silence. "There are cabins a few miles back." We turned the car around, but as we attempted to reverse, the engine sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in the middle of nowhere. Panic set in as we realized we were completely isolated. The nearest help miles away. The atmosphere was thick with an unsettling presence. The once beautiful landscape now shrouded in an eerie gloom. Jenna suggested we set up camp for the night, but the others were hesitant. "There's something off about this place," Lisa whispered, her eyes darting to the surrounding trees. "I feel like we're being watched." We reluctantly agreed, gathering blankets and supplies to stay warm. As we built a makeshift fire, the temperature continued to drop, the cold seeping into our bones. The fire flickered weakly, struggling against the unnatural chill that permeated the air. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of our vision, shifting and contorting into grotesque shapes among the trees. Hours passed in uneasy silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant howling of the wind. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, echoing through the forest like a death knell. We froze, hearts pounding, as the sound repeated, each scream more desperate and haunting than the last. "Did you hear that?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. Mark nodded, his face pale. "We need to get out of here, now." We packed up our things hurriedly, the fear driving us to flee the campsite. As we trudged through the snow, the screams followed, echoing through the trees and amplifying our terror. The shadows seemed to close in around us, the darkness now alive with malevolent intent. Suddenly, Mark stopped, pointing toward the shoreline. "Look!" he exclaimed, his voice strained with fear. There, etched into the snow, were strange footprints, large, humanoid, but distorted and elongated. unlike any animal tracks we had ever seen. They led away from the tree, winding deeper into the forest. Jenna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "They're human, but they're not. Let's follow them," Lisa said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. But I hesitated, a sinking feeling in my gut. "No, this feels wrong. We need to leave before it's too late." Mark shook his head, determination flashing in his eyes. "We can't just ignore this. What if someone, or something, is out there?" Before I could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept through the forest, the snow swirling into a blinding vortex. The temperature dropped further, and an oppressive darkness enveloped us, making it difficult to see. The footprints began to fade, disappearing into the swirling snow as if swallowed by the storm. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form indistinct and shifting. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding silently toward us. My heart raced as I stared in horror, unable to tear my eyes away from the apparition. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice breaking. The figure paused, and for a moment, I could make out a face, hollow eyes, a sorrowful expression etched into its spectral visage. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered, the voice echoing in my mind. "Leave, now." We turned to run, but the storm reasserted its dominance, the wind lashing out like the hands of unseen entities trying to pull us back. Panic surged through me as we stumbled through the snow, the figure's cries growing louder, more desperate, just when I thought we couldn't go any further. The storm began to abate, the darkness lifting to reveal a path illuminated by the first light of dawn. Exhausted and terrified, we made our way back to the car, the footprints no longer visible, the forest returning to its serene, untouched state. As we reached the vehicle, the engine roared to life, a welcome sound in the silent aftermath. We piled in, shivering and breathless, the memory of the night's horrors etched into our minds. As we drove away, the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered landscape. But the sense of unease lingered, a shadow that refused to dissipate. Back in civilization, we recounted our experience to the authorities, but they dismissed it as the product of a freak snowstorm and our own frayed nerves. But we knew better. The footprints, the shadowy figure, the relentless screams, they were too real to ignore. A chilling reminder that Yellowstone held secrets beyond our understanding. In the years that followed, the memory of that Christmas night haunted me. I often found myself staring out the window, watching snow fall softly, the landscape a serene mask hiding the darkness that lurked beneath. Friends and family urged me to let it go, to move on from the traumatic experience. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting for another chance to reach out. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers in the wind, echoes of the screams that night, or catch a glimpse of shadowy figures dancing among the trees. Each time, a shiver ran down my spine, a reminder that the veil between our world and the supernatural was thin, especially in places as mystical and ancient as Yellowstone. That Christmas of 2002 taught me that nature holds both beauty and terror, that the wilderness can be both a sanctuary and a prison for restless souls. And as I approach each holiday season, I carry with me the haunting memory of that night, a silent promise to respect the boundaries of the natural world and to remember the spirits that linger in the shadows, forever entwined with the land they once called home. In the end, Yellowstone remains a place of wonder and mystery, its geothermal heart beating with untold stories and unseen forces. And every Christmas, as the snow blankets the earth and the winds whisper through the pines, I'm reminded that some secrets are better left buried in the dark, untouched by the light of day. Story number 4. Echoes in the steam. The allure of Yellowstone's geothermal wonders had always fascinated me. As an avid nature photographer, the park's geysers, hot springs, and steaming vents provided endless opportunities for capturing nature's raw beauty. But that Christmas of 2010, Yellowstone offered something far more sinister than I had ever anticipated. My friends Mike, Sarah, and Jenna, and I had planned this trip for months, eager to escape the hustle of city life and immerse ourselves in the tranquility of the wilderness. We arrived in early December, the park already blanketed in a thick layer of snow, transforming the landscape into a serene, white expanse. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of bubbling springs. Our main destination was the renowned Old Faithful Geyser Basin, a place where the earth seemed to breathe, releasing steam and water in mesmerizing patterns. The geysers were less active that year, likely due to the colder weather, but the steam vents and hot springs still offered plenty to explore. We decided to spend Christmas Eve camping near one of the smaller geysers, hoping to witness the magic of the night. As dusk settled, we set up our tents, the snow crunching beneath our boots. The sky was a deep indigo, studded with stars that twinkled through the clear night air. We built a fire, its warmth a comforting contrast to the biting cold. Mike and Sarah unpacked snacks and hot beverages, while Jenna and I arranged our photography equipment, eager to capture the geyser's nocturnal activity. The first few hours passed peacefully, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional hiss of steam from the vents. We shared stories and laughed, the camaraderie making the remote location feel safe and inviting. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped further, and a thick blanket of snow began to fall, muffling the world around us. "All right, let's get some photos," I suggested, adjusting my camera settings. The low light should give us some interesting shots. We ventured out into the snow, our flashlights casting narrow beams of light that danced over the icy ground. The geyser we were near was dormant, its basin a mirror of ice reflecting the night sky. We moved carefully, mindful of the slippery terrain, positioning ourselves to capture the subtle movements of steam and water vapor. As we settled into our spots, a sense of unease began to creep over me. It was subtle at first, a fleeting shadow at the edge of my vision, a distant whisper carried by the wind. I shook it off, attributing it to the isolation and the eerie beauty of the night. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing minute. "Did you guys feel that?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. "Yeah, something's not right." Mike and Sarah glanced around, their expressions mirroring my concern. "Probably just the wind," Mike said, though his tone lacked conviction. But it wasn't just the wind. A sudden, sharp chill swept through the area, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We huddled closer to the fire, the warmth offering little comfort against the inexplicable cold. That's when we heard it, a soft, guttural whisper that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath us. "Leave, now." The voice was faint, barely audible over the natural sounds of the night, but its intent was unmistakable. We exchanged uneasy glances, the hairs on our arms prickling with fear. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. Before anyone could respond, a low moan echoed through the basin, the sound reverberating off the icy walls and amplifying our sense of dread. Shadows seemed to twist and contort in the corners of our vision, moving independently of any source. Jenna clutched her camera tightly, her hands shaking. "We should go back," Mike urged, his voice tense. "This isn't normal." But as we turned to leave, the ground beneath us began to tremble, small vibrations shaking our feet. The fire flickered violently, the flames dancing erratically as if caught in an unseen storm. We stumbled backward, the snow slipping beneath our boots as the tremors intensified. "What's happening?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. Before anyone could answer, a figure materialized before us, emerging from the swirling snow and steam. It was a woman, dressed in vintage winter attire, her face obscured by shadows. Her presence was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a spectral apparition standing motionless in the midst of the chaos. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. The woman raised a hand, her fingers elongated and twisted, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Leave, Now, before it's too late. Panic surged through us as the apparition began to move, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. We turned and ran, the snowstorm enveloping us as the woman pursued, her cries echoing through the geyser basin. The vibrations intensified, the ground now shaking violently, threatening to swallow us whole. "We need to get back to camp," Jenna screamed, pulling me toward the direction of our tents. We sprinted through the snow, the storm now a full-blown tempest, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. The fire's light faded behind us, swallowed by the blinding white of the snowstorm. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the horror unfolding before us. The woman's voice echoed in my ears, a haunting plea that drove us forward with a desperate urgency. As we neared the campsite, a blinding flash of light illuminated the area, momentarily dispelling the darkness. The woman stood at the edge of the light, her form solidifying, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the world reduced to the flickering flames and her sorrowful gaze. "You must protect the land," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody that resonated deep within me. "Respect the balance, or suffer the consequences." Before I could respond, the storm intensified once more, the ground shaking with renewed fury. The woman's form began to dissolve, her presence fading into the swirling snow and steam. The tremors subsided, the storm dissipating as quickly as it had arisen, leaving us breathless and shaken in the silent aftermath. We stood there, hearts racing, the weight of her message pressing down on us. The spectral apparition was gone, leaving behind only the lingering sense of her warning. We huddled together, the reality of what had happened sinking in. "Do you think she was a spirit?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, still trembling. "But we need to respect this place more. Maybe we took something for granted." We packed up our gear in silence, the snow still falling gently around us. The experience had left an indelible mark on our souls, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that govern the natural world. As we made our way back to civilization, the memory of that night haunted me, the echoes of the woman's plea lingering in my mind. In the days that followed, we shared our story with the park rangers and fellow visitors, but no one could explain the apparition or the strange phenomena we had encountered. Some dismissed it as a collective hallucination brought on by the cold and isolation, while others whispered about ancient spirits and guardians of the land. But I knew what I had seen and heard. Yellowstone was more than just a collection of geysers and hot springs. It was a living, breathing entity, with its own set of rules and protectors. The woman's presence was a stark reminder that nature demands respect and balance, and that humanity's intrusion can have dire consequences. Years have passed since that Christmas Eve, but the memory remains vivid, a ghostly echo that accompanies me whenever I return to Yellowstone. The park's beauty continues to draw visitors from all over the world, each one unaware of the silent guardians that watch over them. I often wonder if the woman I saw is still there, silently observing and protecting the land she loved so dearly. Every time I hike through the geyser basins, I tread more carefully, mindful of the delicate balance between human curiosity and the untamed wilderness. The experience taught me that some mysteries are best left unexplored, and that the true beauty of nature lies not just in its grandeur, but in its ability to inspire awe and respect in equal measure. And so, every Christmas, as I gaze upon the steam vents and bubbling hot springs, I remember that night, the whispers in the wind, the spectral apparition, and the haunting reminder to honor and protect the natural world. Yellowstone's geothermal heart beats on, a timeless testament to the power and mystery of nature, forever guarding its secrets beneath the snow and steam. Story number 5. Footsteps in the snow. The Yellowstone winter was unforgiving, a relentless assault of cold and snow that blanketed the vast expanse of the park in a pristine, white silence. But there was a certain magic to it, a stark beauty that drew people like moths to a flame. I was one of them, desperate for an escape from the suffocating monotony of everyday life. My friends Mark, Jenna, and Lisa shared my yearning for adventure, and together we decided to spend Christmas in the heart of Yellowstone, hoping the wilderness would offer solace and perhaps a hint of the extraordinary. We arrived on a frigid December afternoon, the sky a dull gray as snowflakes danced in the bitter wind. Our group joined a guided tour, eager to explore the park's hidden gems. The tour leader, an enthusiastic man named Tom, regaled us with tales of geysers, wildlife, and the park's rich history. But what captivated us most were his stories of unexplained phenomena, mysterious lights in the sky, eerie sounds echoing through the trees, and, most intriguingly, the strange footprints discovered along the shores of Yellowstone Lake. Some of these tracks look almost human, Tom explained, showing us photos of large footprints with an unusual gait and elongated toes. But they don't match any animal known to inhabit this area. It's as if something or someone else is out there. The idea of an undiscovered creature lurking in the park ignited our curiosity. We spent the next few days hiking, boating, and marveling at the natural wonders. But our minds kept drifting back to those enigmatic tracks. By Christmas Eve, we found ourselves camping near the tranquil shores of Yellowstone Lake, the water a mirror reflecting the towering pines and the encroaching darkness of the night. The campsite was serene, perfect spot for stargazing and sharing stories. We gathered around a crackling fire, sipping hot cocoa and reminiscing about past adventures. The night was cold, the fire's warmth a comforting barrier against the biting wind. It was during these quiet moments that the forest seemed to come alive, whispering secrets in the rustling leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Around midnight, as the embers of our fire glowed softly, Jenna suggested a midnight walk to enjoy the stillness of the lake. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon Mark and Lisa agreed. I hesitated, feeling a pang of unease, but the allure of the quiet night was too strong to resist. Reluctantly, I joined them, pulling my coat tighter against the cold. We trudged through the deep snow, the crunch of our boots the only sound breaking the silence. The moon was a thin crescent, casting a pale light over the landscape. As we reached the shoreline, the lake stretched out before us, its surface frozen in a delicate dance of ice crystals. Jenna marveled at the beauty, while Mark pointed out the constellations barely visible through the cloudy sky. "Remember those footprints Tom showed us?" Jenna asked, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Imagine if we saw something like that right here." I nodded, my heart racing at the thought. It'd be amazing or terrifying. Suddenly, Lisa stopped, her eyes wide as she stared at something behind me. I turned to see a set of footprints in the snow, similar to those Tom had described, but fresh. They led away from the lake and into the dense woods beyond. My blood ran cold. "Do you guys see that?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. Mark approached the footprints cautiously, squinting into the darkness. "They look like someone's been here recently. But who?" Before we could ponder further, a distant, echoing howl pierced the night, sending shivers down our spines. The wind picked up, swirling the snow around us and muting the sounds of the forest. We exchanged uneasy glances, the thrill of discovery now mingling with a palpable sense of dread. "Should we follow them?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark hesitated, then shook his head. "No way, it's too dangerous out here. We should go back." But curiosity got the better of me. What if it's the same creature that left those tracks? We could document it, prove that Tom was right. Lisa grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading. "No, Tom, it's not safe. Let's go." I sighed, feeling torn between rational thought and the intoxicating allure of the unknown. Reluctantly, I agreed. "All right, but let's stick together and stay alert." We began to follow the footprints, the trail leading us deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow, creating an almost claustrophobic canopy. The further we walked, the colder it became, the darkness pressing in around us. The only light came from our flashlights, casting long, wavering beams that barely penetrated the dense forest. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small clearing, the footprints fading away near an old, abandoned cabin. The structure was dilapidated, windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. An eerie silence enveloped the area, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. "This place gives me the creeps," Mark muttered, his bravado faltering. Jenna looked around nervously. "Maybe we should check it out. There could be something inside." Lisa nodded, though her fear was evident. "If we do, let's be careful. Stay close." Taking a deep breath, I stepped toward the cabin, pushing open the creaking door. The interior was dark, the remnants of furniture covered in thick layers of dust and cobwebs. My flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing broken furniture and signs of neglect. There was no sign of anyone, but the atmosphere was thick with an unsettling presence. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from upstairs, causing us all to jump. I exchanged fearful glances with my friends, the realization hitting us all at once. Something was here, something watching us. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, we need to get out of here." But as we turned to leave, a chilling laughter filled the room, echoing off the walls like 1,000 broken mirrors. It was a sound that defied logic, childlike yet filled with malevolence. The laughter seemed to come from all directions, disorienting us and heightening our fear. Mark took a step forward, his courage wavering. "Who's there? Show yourself." The laughter intensified, transforming into screams of anguish and rage. The temperature plummeted, our breaths visible in the freezing air. Shadows seemed to twist and contort, forming grotesque shapes that danced around us in the dim light. "We need to go," Jenna cried, tugging at my sleeve. We turned and fled the cabin, the sounds of torment pursuing us through the woods. The snowstorm had grown more intense, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. Every step felt like a struggle against an invisible force, the darkness pressing in around us. As we stumbled through the forest, a blinding flash of light illuminated the path ahead, momentarily disorienting us. When our vision cleared, we found ourselves at the edge of the lake, the footprints leading us back to where we started. The storm had subsided, leaving a haunting calm in its wake. Breathless and shaken, we huddled together, the memory of the night's horrors etched into our minds. The strange footprints, the abandoned cabin, the chilling laughter, it all pointed to something beyond our understanding, something that had been awakened by our intrusion. In the days that followed, we tried to rationalize the experience. Perhaps it was the wind, shaped by the landscape into eerie sounds. Maybe our minds, exhausted by the cold and the isolation, had conjured up the horrors we thought we saw and heard. But deep down, we knew it was something more. A presence, a spirit tied to the land, seeking acknowledgement and perhaps vengeance. The disappearance of Jake and Emily during that Christmas had left a lingering unease among the park visitors. Their car had been found abandoned, their belongings scattered across the snow, but no trace of them had ever been discovered. Theories abounded, ranging from accidental frostbite to foul play, but the true cause remained a mystery. Years later, I still think about that night in Yellowstone, the footprints along the shore, the haunted cabin, the spectral laughter. It all serves as a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some places better left unexplored. The wilderness holds secrets that defy explanation, and sometimes, the most terrifying encounters are those that blur the line between reality and the supernatural. Every Christmas, as I pass by Yellowstone Lake, I glance toward the shores, half expecting to see those strange footprints or catch a glimpse of something lurking in the shadows. The memory of that night haunts me, a ghostly echo that lingers in the silence of the snowy woods. I've learned to respect the boundaries of nature, to honor the stories and the spirits that call this land home. But the curiosity remains, a flicker of hope that perhaps, one day, the mystery of Jake and Emily's disappearance will be unraveled, and the restless spirits will finally find the peace they seek. Until then, the footprints in the snow remain, a silent testament to the unknown, and the voices in the wind whisper tales of sorrow and loss that resonate through the heart of Yellowstone, especially during the cold, silent nights of Christmas. Story number 6. Voices in the Snow. The December air was bitterly cold that Christmas Eve of 1995, and the snowfall that had begun as a gentle dusting early in the afternoon had transformed into a relentless flurry by nightfall. I remember every detail, etched into my mind as if carved by icy blades. Our small group, me, my partner Lisa, and our friends Andy and Selena, had chosen this remote campground in Yellowstone for a holiday getaway. Drawn by the idea of spending Christmas beneath endless pine forests and starlit skies instead of cramped apartments and neon-lit streets, we wanted stillness, something pure to hold onto amidst the chaos of our everyday lives. We settled into the camp before dusk, pitching our tents with numb fingers, laughing off the discomfort and stamping our boots against the frozen ground to stay warm. The place was strangely quiet, the usual chorus of animals, the distant howls and chirps that one might expect in a national park, were absent. Instead, the only sound was the hush of the falling snow. I remember thinking it was beautiful, like the world had decided to hold its breath just for us. We huddled around a small fire that sputtered and hissed in protest at the moisture-laden air. Andy cracked jokes, Selena hummed half-remembered carols, and Lisa and I sipped hot cocoa laced with a little whiskey. For a moment, life felt good, as if we'd stepped into the kind of Christmas card scene that people dream about. Around midnight, just as I was contemplating turning in, something changed. The wind picked up, threading through the trees, and from somewhere out there in the darkness came a cry, a high-pitched shriek that cut through the silence like a blade. It was distant at first, barely more than a whisper on the wind, but enough to make us all look up, our breath pluming in the cold air. We listened, straining our ears, and soon it came again, louder this time and more desperate, like the cry of a wounded animal or a terrified child. A ripple of unease passed through our group. Selena reached for Andy's hand. Lisa looked at me, her eyes wide. I tried to steady my voice. Probably just some critter, I said, knowing full well that no animal I knew of screamed like that. There was too much anguish in the sound, too much human fear. Another scream tore through the night, closer than before, resonating from behind a stand of snow-laden pines. We got to our feet, shining flashlights into the swirling snow. The beams caught flakes turning silver and gold, but revealed nothing else. The screaming didn't stop, only changed in pitch and direction, as if something or someone was circling our camp, crying out as it moved. It was too cold to stand there and shiver. So Andy and I decided to investigate while Selena and Lisa waited by the fire, armed with flashlights and a sturdy walking stick I'd found by the campsite. We stepped away from the feeble warmth of the flames and ventured into the shadows. The snow was knee-deep, and every step was a labor. The wind flung stinging flakes into our eyes. We staggered toward where we thought we'd heard the screams, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there? Do you need help?" Our voices were swallowed by the storm. There was no reply, only more screams, rising and falling. Some so faint they seemed to come from miles away. Others so close I half expected something to leap from behind a tree and grab us. We searched and searched, but found no footprints other than our own. No broken branches to suggest someone had run through the forest. No signs of struggle. No torn clothing. Nothing. Just the hush of the snow and those terrible screams that would emerge from the darkness, fade, and then reappear elsewhere. After what felt like hours, we returned to the campsite. Selena and Lisa looked relieved to see us. They had heard more screams too, circling like wolves. They'd shouted themselves hoarse, begging whoever it was to reveal themselves. to come into the light. But the only answer was another shriek drifting between the trees. We were left rattled, confused, and frightened. We decided to stay together, huddled by the dimming fire. The screams continued, sometimes distant, sometimes hauntingly near, as if prowling just beyond sight. The snow intensified, and the temperature plummeted. Our tents sagged under the weight of fresh powder. We considered packing up and fleeing, but the conditions were too harsh. The car too far away through untrodden snow. We had no choice but to endure the night and pray that dawn would bring answers, or at least normalcy. None of us slept. How could we, with those cries echoing in our ears? Sometimes they sounded like a man, other times a woman, then a child, or a chorus of voices all at once, overlapping into a dreadful cacophony. The sound rose and fell with the gusts of wind, always just out of reach, always refusing to be understood. I remember clenching Lisa's hand, feeling her trembling, and realizing I was trembling too. Selena, usually so composed, kept muttering half-prayers under her breath. Andy tried to keep our spirits up, but his jokes fell flat. His voice strained. The atmosphere was charged with an indescribable tension, as if the very forest itself had turned against us. At some point in the early morning hours, just before the first pale hint of dawn, the screams began to fade. They grew softer, more distant, until we could barely hear them. By the time faint light touched the snow-laden treetops, all was silent once more. We emerged from a restless, terrified vigil to find the world transformed by the blizzard. A sea of white drifts and frosted branches glistening under a new day's sky. Weak with exhaustion, we trudged back to the parking lot. Our car sat half-buried in a snowbank, its windows frosted over. The silence was profound, as if the forest was embarrassed by the night's events and chose to mask them under fresh snow and morning light. We felt the weight of the previous night's terror pressing on our minds. Reluctant to speak of it, we drove out of Yellowstone in heavy silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The screams, the inability to find any source, the sense of being tormented by something unseen. It was too strange, too horrifying. By the time we reached a gas station miles away, we agreed we would tell no one. Who would believe us? We sounded like fools, hysterical from the cold and the dark. But none of us doubted what we had heard. In the weeks that followed, I tried to rationalize the experience. Perhaps it was just the wind, shaped by the valley and the trees into something that sounded like screaming. Perhaps a distant avalanche or some natural phenomenon we didn't understand. But in my heart, I knew better. The terror we felt, the intelligence behind those cries, it was no accident. No simple trick of acoustics. Over the years, I've scoured newspapers and archives, looking for any mention of strange disappearances or legends tied to that Christmas in 1995. A few murky anecdotes surfaced, stories of lost hikers, rumors of vengeful spirits lurking in the woods, and old Native American legends warning travelers away from certain parts of the forest during winter. But nothing definitive, nothing that could explain our night of horror. I still think about that Christmas Eve in Yellowstone, especially when December rolls around and the air grows cold. The memory is as sharp as ever. The screams drifting through the snow, the sense of presence just beyond the tree line, and the helplessness we felt beneath that silent, starless sky. We never returned to that campground. None of us had the stomach for it. But sometimes I wonder if the screams still echo there, waiting for the next group of travelers foolish enough to venture out on a winter's night, lured by the beauty of a Christmas spent in the wilderness. Perhaps those voices belong to spirits who never found rest, or to something older, more malevolent than we can imagine. In the end, I can't say what we encountered, but I know one thing. There are places where the veil between worlds is thin, where sorrow and rage can manifest in eerie cries that ride the wind. On that Christmas Eve in 1995, we stumbled into such a place, and the screams we heard still haunt my dreams. A chilling reminder that some mysteries remain forever unsolved. Story number 7. Whispers in the Snow. I still remember the winter of 1982 as if it were etched into my very soul. The cold was relentless, biting through every layer of clothing and seeping into the bones of Yellowstone National Park. It was Christmas time, a season meant for warmth and joy, but for Jake and Emily Thompson, it became the beginning of a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. Jake and Emily were my closest friends. We had met in college. Our bond forged through shared adventures and late-night conversations about everything from dreams to fears. When they decided to spend their Christmas break exploring the winter wilderness of Yellowstone, I supported their decision, though a nagging sense of unease lingered in the back of my mind. They arrived at the park in late December. The landscape transformed into a pristine, white wonderland. Snow blanketed the ground. Trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with frost. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the distant howl of wolves. Jake was an experienced hiker, confident in his ability to navigate the rugged terrain, while Emily, ever the free spirit, embraced the solitude and beauty of nature. Their plan was simple: set up camp near Old Faithful, spend a few days hiking and enjoying the serene beauty of the park. I visited them a day before they were set to depart, helping them pack supplies and ensuring they had everything they needed for the journey. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" I asked, concern evident in my voice. Jake chuckled, slapping me gently on the back. "Don't worry, Tom. We'll be fine. Just a few days out in the wild." Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's going to be magical, Jake. Just imagine the snow-covered landscapes and the tranquility." I nodded, trying to mask my apprehension. "All right, but promise me you'll stay in touch and be careful." They assured me they'd check in regularly, and with a final hug, they set off into the snowy expanse. For the next few days, I heard from them sporadically, texts and phone calls filled with updates about their hikes and the breathtaking views they encountered. But on Christmas Eve, their messages abruptly stopped. Panic set in the following morning when I tried to reach them. Their phones went straight to voicemail, and their social media accounts lay dormant. I contacted the park authorities, and a search and rescue operation was swiftly organized. The initial search was extensive, covering miles of rugged terrain, but there was no sign of Jake and Emily. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. The only clue was their abandoned vehicle, found near a secluded trailhead, doors ajar, and personal belongings scattered across the snow. The park rangers were baffled, unable to determine what had happened to them. The official explanation pointed to a possible snowstorm that might have disoriented them. But something about the case didn't add up. Rumors began to circulate among the locals. Some spoke of strange lights in the woods. Others mentioned eerie sounds that echoed through the night. The most chilling claim was that of a shadowy figure seen near their last known location. A figure dressed in outdated winter gear, standing motionless before disappearing into the blinding snow. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to delve deeper into the mystery. I started by retracing Jake and Emily's steps, visiting the trails they had planned to explore. The park was beautiful but unforgiving, the winter landscape hiding secrets beneath its blanket of snow. One evening, as I hiked along the Old Faithful Trail, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The air grew colder, and a dense fog rolled in, reducing visibility to mere feet. I set up camp near a small clearing, the fire providing a semblance of warmth against the encroaching cold. As I sat by the fire, the silence of the wilderness enveloped me, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning wood. I pulled out Jake's journal, a memento he had left behind, filled with notes and sketches of the trails they had planned to hike. One entry caught my eye: December 23rd, 1982. "We're heading towards the North Trail tonight. Heard about some unusual sightings near the ridge. Should be nothing, but we'll keep an eye out. Looking forward to some peace and quiet." I glanced up, noticing the trees around me casting ominous shadows in the firelight. A A sudden gust of wind rustled the branches, and the temperature dropped sharply. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, a sense of unease settling in. That's when I heard it, a faint, distant laughter carried by the wind. It was soft, almost childlike, but there was something unnerving about its tone. I strained to listen, trying to pinpoint its source, but the sounds seemed to come from all directions, echoing through the dense forest. "Emily? Jake?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. Only the haunting laughter continued, growing slightly louder, more distinct. The air around me felt thick, the fire's warmth waning against the creeping cold. I stood up, deciding to investigate, but every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of the woods. As I moved forward, the laughter transformed into whispers, a chorus of voices, some familiar, others foreign. The snow beneath my feet crunched loudly, each sound amplified in the eerie silence of the night. I felt eyes watching me, a presence lurking just beyond my vision. Suddenly, a blinding light pierced through the fog, illuminating a clearing up ahead. My heart raced as I approached, the source of the light revealing a figure standing before me. It was a woman, dressed in vintage winter attire, her face obscured by shadows. She stood motionless, staring at me with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. "Eleanor," I whispered, recognizing her name from old park legends. Eleanor Hartley, a young woman who had mysteriously vanished in Yellowstone in 1923. Her disappearance had never been solved, and many believed her spirit still roamed the park, forever searching for her lost love. The woman turned slowly, her movements graceful yet unnatural. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice echoing through the clearing. I took a step back, my mind racing with questions and fear. "Who are you? Where are Jake and Emily?" Her eyes softened, a tear rolling down her cheek. "They got lost, just like I did. The storm, it took them." Before I could respond, the snowstorm intensified, the wind howling around us like a chorus of anguished spirits. The woman began to fade, her form dissolving into the swirling snowflakes. "Help them find peace," she whispered before disappearing entirely, leaving me alone in the storm. Panic surged through me as the realization hit. Eleanor's spirit was intertwined with Jake and Emily's disappearance. I needed to find them, to uncover the truth behind the supernatural forces at play. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a tranquil, snow-covered landscape. I resumed the search, now driven by a deeper purpose. I followed the trails they had taken, my steps guided by Eleanor's lingering presence. Hours passed with no sign of Jake and Emily. But then, near a frozen stream, I heard the faint sound of voices. Following the sound, I discovered a hidden grove, the snow untouched and eerily silent. In the center stood a makeshift shrine, candles flickering against the cold, their flames dancing in the breeze. Before me stood Jake and Emily, their faces pale and eyes hollow, frozen in a moment of terror. They were caught in a supernatural trap, their spirits unable to break free from the storm's grasp. The whispers of Eleanor echoed around us, a plea for help that resonated deep within my soul. I approached them cautiously, reaching out to touch their hands. "Jake, Emily, it's me, Tom. I'm here to help you." The moment our hands met, a surge of warmth enveloped us, the cold dissipating as the spirits began to rise. Eleanor's voice filled the air once more, her sorrow giving way to hope. "Thank you, Tom. Help us find peace." With a final, collective effort, I led them out of the grove, guiding their spirits toward the light of day. The storm's remnants melted away, replaced by the gentle glow of the rising sun. Jake and Emily's forms dissolved into the morning light, their souls finally free from the storm's eternal grip. Eleanor watched from the shadows, a serene smile on her face before she too faded into the light, her long search for peace finally over. As I stood alone in the grove, the memory of that night etched into my mind, I realized the true power of compassion and determination. Jake and Emily's disappearance had been more than a tragic accident. It was a battle between the living and the restless spirits of the past, a struggle for peace and closure that transcended time. In the years that followed, I dedicated myself to helping lost souls find their way, inspired by the events of that fateful Christmas. Yellowstone remained a place of beauty and mystery, its winter landscape hiding secrets beneath its pristine surface. But now, I knew that beneath the snow and silence, the echoes of the past still whispered, waiting for someone to listen and help them find their peace. Every Christmas, as I reflect on that night, I am reminded of the thin veil between our world and the spirits that linger in the shadows. The whispers in the snow serve as a haunting reminder that some stories never truly end. They simply wait to be heard, longing for the day when peace can finally be found.